If I knew you, I'd come over there, I'd plug it in, and people would always say the same thing. How come I've never heard of this? That's amazing.
Hey, my friends, we have a fascinating show for you today. There's a fellow who has a radical conversion story, but the conversion story happens in a very mundane way in that it's exactly what you normally do. Raised a Catholic by really good parents, and then falls away, leaves the faith, and joins an evangelical church, and then gets sent a miraculous video, no kidding, an actual miraculous video that speaks to him in a way that brings him back, and now he's an apostle. Tim, so good to be with you.
Beautiful. So glad to be with you, John. So glad. So great for your apostolate, and so happy to share this message.
Awesome. Let's begin as we always do with the sign of the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. So, Tim, many people won't be familiar with your story. So why don't you give us sort of the nutshell version of your conversion?
You bet, 100%. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, and it's about 5,000 people, John. Like, everybody knew everybody. And I was one of six. There's 5 boys and a girl. No Catholic school there. So I just went to secular school, but we went to Catholic Mass. We had to. Mom and Dad, very, very faithful. And, very orderly. I got no horror stories. And I went off to college like a lot of kids. I started getting into the bars with a fake ID of my brother's when I was like 15. And, I still remember his social security number. I tell him, I still got it, Mike. But I went out to Ohio State and it just big university, like so people can, and I just thought, this is awesome. And I tell people my feast days were, I didn't know about feast days. My feast days were Ohio State, Michigan football, right? I lived for working out, football. I wasn't on a football team at Ohio State. I did play in high school, but, just that whole deal. And did a lot of partying, but right at the end of my college years, I got introduced to cocaine, and I'd never been around drugs my whole life. I mean, I was a health nut, still am. But it just happened. I was working in a bar and they introduced me to it, and out of curiosity, really. And that sent me at the end of my college years. I was just about to graduate on a tailspin. So, looking back, and I have a book I just wrote, which I'm not a writer. I was asked for years to do this, called From the Crack House to God's House, literally from the crack house to God's house, the power of a mother's prayer. So anyways, what happened is I went down to Texas and I was chasing money, a business opportunity. I met my wife in a bar. My wife has no religious background, zero. And we got invited to, eventually as we were dating and we were going to get married, we got invited to a big mega church down in Texas called Fellowship Church. It's truly the grand poobah of mega churches. And the idea, it's been all over the news for 20 years for creativity. 20,000 people. I'd never seen something like this. And today they're common. But I thought, can't believe this is church. My wife loved it. And so we kind of went from what I would say the bar scene to the Bible scene. I just dove in. I mean, I was thinking, how do I even know Jesus is real? Like, how do I know it's not a Santa Claus story? Because, come on, I've bought into a lot of things before. And so people started giving me books like Evidence That Demands a Verdict by Josh McDowell. And of course, The Case for Christ and things like that. So I got real excited that there actually this could be real, that Jesus was not some made up story. And not to be rude, but I had better things to do with my time. That was my mindset than to go spend a weekend listening to a guy talk about a bunch of stuff that might not be real, right? So at the same time period, I called my mom and I said, hey, Mom, I'm going to church. Now, I thought my mom would be happy. My mom's kind of like a Mother Teresa kind of lady. And she said, do they have a mass? And I literally didn't know that language. Okay. I didn't go to Catholic school. So I didn't do they have a mass? Like, let me check into it. That's kind of my mindset, right? Now, I'm kind of like a sports football guy at this time, not a Bible guy, right? And she said, I just want you to know what you're giving up. Now, I hadn't been going to church for years consistently anyways, but I love my mom. And I said, okay. So she started sending me tapes. I'm sure some of your listeners are familiar with the Journey Home show by Marcus Grodi with the conversion stories. So I went on this big quest to figure out which version of Christianity is most biblical, historical. I didn't go to seminary. So I said, okay, I need to have really smart people like John-Henry on one side and the opposing views on the other side, and have debates. So I don't know. I'm sure you know who Father Mitch Pacwa is. He was at my house because he used to teach at University of Dallas. And so I had leaders. I had Tim Staples. He was at my house. They were debating the leaders of a church called Denton Bible Church. So I started listening to debates, and I learned the Catholic faith by listening to debates because I wanted to hear the best of both arguments. So here's where this supernatural element comes in. I decided by listening to these debates for a year or more that the Catholic Church absolutely was the most biblical and historical of the Christian faiths. And I listened to the best arguments against the Catholic Church, and I still do. But my wife didn't want anything to do with it. And it wasn't theology, it was relationship. We went from the bar scene to the Bible scene, and we had great friends. It was awesome, right? Virtue-driven people. So it was a tough deal. But along that same time period, my mother, it keeps going back to my mom, she sent me another tape. It was on Fox, and this is what you were alluding to. 29 million people watch this, and I'm sure you can show them a clip of this right now. I mean to tell you, when I say nothing like this has ever been filmed, according to the father of Australian investigative journalism, I call him the Mike Wallace of Australia for the people of the United States. He was an atheist. He didn't believe in God. He hated the Catholic Church with a passion, and he investigates this over many years with Ron Tesserero. And they filmed this lady predicting and having a stigmata, the wounds of Christ. Let me just kind of slow down. You got to know where I was. I didn't go to Catholic school, John. So it would be like if somebody sent you a tape of Bigfoot. I just couldn't believe I was witnessing somebody have the wounds of Christ. Now, because see, remember, I'd already read Evidence That Demands a Verdict, The Case for Christ. So I intellectually knew there was historical evidence for Jesus. I understood the apologetics behind the Catholic faith. But what happened is there was an issue for me. When I started going back to the Catholic Church in the early 2000s, it was like I remember people would come late and leave early. And I couldn't even find a Bible study in the early 2000s where I was. But when I was at the big mega church, they came early and left late. They had 20 home groups. They were really talking about Jesus 24/7. So I had this question. If all this is real, if the Catholic Church is the Church of Christ, why aren't people like on their knees lined up to receive the body and blood of Jesus? Which was the main selling point for me, by the way. So I got this video from my mom. I used to plug it in people's VCR. So it's like, if I knew you, remember, I'm not going to Catholic Church. If I knew you, I come over there, I plug it in. And people would always say the same thing. How come I've never heard of this? That's amazing. By the way, people still say that. When they watch the video that you'll show them, they still say that. They can watch the whole show on my website, which I'm sure you'll give them. I lose the tape. I'm going to the Catholic Church eventually, intellectually, and my wife didn't want to be Catholic, so we were going to the mega church and the Catholic Church. And I think you'll appreciate this. My son, who's now 20, almost 24, he was probably 8 or 9. He used to say, "Are we going to the fun church or the boring church?" Right? Yeah, but today, brother, he prefers the Latin only mass. That's my son. He wants the reverence.
Oh, wow.
You see? And so anyways, here's what happens. My mother dies, and it's in my book. It's a sudden, tragic deal. So literally 10 years after my mom gave me the tape, I still don't know what it means. I don't even know that stigmata is connected to the Catholic Church. You understand? I literally just thought I had the biblical and historical evidence for Jesus, but now I felt I had supernatural evidence. And that's what excited me. I was quite a doubting Thomas because I'd seen so much being in cells and everything. I didn't know what to believe, to be frank with you. So then here's amazing what happened. I really think this is a huge miracle. Some guy who I used to kind of party with, he doesn't even go to church. He calls me out of the blue in 2009. And he says, "Yo, Tim, I was cleaning out my house and you left a tape there." He goes, "I thought you might want it." And I got there and it was my mom's VCR tape of the show. See, she had died. And so I go, there's mom on the other side pushing me to this. There's no book. There's no website, man. There's nothing. There's no part 2. So in 2009, I Google and I find who you interviewed, Ron Tesserero. I find his book was launched in 2007. He's written 3 books, but it's his second. It was his first book called Reason to Believe. And I said, this is it. This is what I've been wanting. This is what my mom is pushing me to. This is what God wants me to know. So I get hold of Ron. He sends me everything he's got. And after that, John, I I started going to daily mass in 2009. Has never stopped. I started praying the rosary, going to holy hour. I mean, all the things my mom probably would have liked me to do when she was alive.
What was it in the book that turned you around to daily mass, daily rosary, and all that? Because that's from the point of belief to practice in such a sincere and full way. What did that for you?
Oh, yes. I'm glad you asked that question because, in fact, the lady who has the stigmata and this lady, she's been getting messages. You interviewed Ron Tesserero about her, I'm sure. And her name's Catalina Rivas. She's been under the church's guidance from the beginning. And Ron literally filmed her writing for an hour straight without pausing one time. Now, she never finished 7th grade, right? And she only speaks Spanish, and she writes in Latin, Greek, Polish, and Italian. And her archbishop said, these are not just pious words from a pious person. That's her archbishop. He said, no, these are words from Christ. So when you ask what changed, what made change, I was curious. I wanted to read, what the heck is she writing, this lady who has the stigmata? And when I read it, it said, Jesus told her, he said, you are my apostle of the Eucharist. I have never given anybody more on the Eucharist than you. Now, I've known about this Eucharistic revival since 2009 because I was reading the books. And so as I read the books, everything cleared up for me. What do I mean? I had that question. Remember, when I was going to the mega church in the Catholic Church, it was, why aren't people taking advantage of what, according to Scott Hahn and all these great apologists, is the body and blood of Jesus? And that hit me when I read the books. It seems obvious, but what hit me was, oh my gosh, most people are unaware. Most people don't know about it. In fact, the large percentage of quote unquote Catholics are not taking advantage of it. How do I know that? Because 70 or 80% of them are missing mass, right? And they're not going to confession. And I'm not even getting into they're bad or they're going to go to hell. That's not my point. My point is they're not taking advantage of the gifts and they're not even aware of it. And so when I read those messages, first of all, I challenge anybody to read 2 pages and put it down. You won't be able to. And there's a book that I had put together by a Baptist, and it's the most Catholic book you can ever imagine. He's been a book publisher for 30 years, and he said, these are words from God, Tim. And I said, amen. So he just put it together. It's on my website called Jesus Speaks, and it's 7 of her books in one. And it's starting with the Holy Mass, and then it gets into the Passion. You want to get the best commentary on the last 7 sayings of Jesus on the cross? Now, I've listened to Scott Hahn. I love Scott Hahn. But can I just be frank and nothing personal, Scott? This lady who never finished 7th grade, her little book that's in that book called Jesus Speaks, the last 7 sayings of Jesus, it blows it away. It's the best commentary I've ever read on the last 7 sayings of Jesus. And so when you read those, you want to go to Mass. It's not fun. It's not supposed to be fun, as you know. It's a sacrifice. But you want, the same way I used to work out, and I still do my whole life. You don't go working out your first year working out because it's fun. You go because you have a goal in mind, right? I'm going to play football. I'm going to do this. And the same with this. And I know I'm preaching to the choir with you, but yeah, man, just everything in there was directing me back to the heart of worship. The sacrifice of the Mass, the idea that Jesus' heart was suffering. Why? You interviewed Ron Tesserero about Eucharistic miracles. Why is the host bleeding? Guess what, John? Jesus answers it in there, right? This is the same person, Ron, who interviewed this lady who filmed her have the stigmata. He's the same one that, as you know, did the primary investigation into the Eucharistic miracle of Buenos Aires. It's all tied together.
For U.S. residents, creating a will has never been easier. Thanks to My Legacy Will, an online platform free of charge, you can now create your own will and choose to include LifeSite News in it. Specify where your funeral will take place, the number of masses to be offered for your soul, and how your estate will be distributed. We would be deeply grateful if you remembered LifeSite News in your will. Visit mylegacywill.com/LifeSite News. Thank you for your support. And may God bless you. It's really beautiful stuff because, I mean, this is where, as your website says, science tests faith. because it is, first of all, tell us about the site just so that people know what I'm talking about. This is your website.
Yes, it's nothing fancy, but science test is plural, sciencetestfaith.com. And you'll be able to get that book just coming out literally within 2 weeks called Jesus Speaks. That's the prize possession, especially for Lent. I wrote a book called From the Crack House to God's House, and it's the story of my mother praying me back into the church, and you see it visibly. And I also, of course, promote Ron Tesoriero, My Human Heart. That's what's got me started down this road. And you will see the lady have the stigmata. Never been filmed before in human history, ever, never, from beginning until end. And it's that show that my mom sent me is on my website where people can just watch it. You know what I mean?
If you ever want to see something where you actually watch the wounds appear and disappear, it is absolutely stunning. The testimony of Ron, he was with, just to stress that point, he was with Mike Willesee. Who is it today? Tucker Carlson, if you will, or Megyn Kelly.
Absolutely.
Like, that's who he was back then. He's huge. And it was Megyn Kelly and Tucker before they were canceled from Fox even. Like, the top of the top. But as you said, Tim, he hated the faith and he went to disprove it. Very much in history, we have this happen over and over again where you have, like at Fatima, and we're actually taping this, interestingly, on the feast of, or the 20th anniversary of the death of Sister Lucy. But it's interesting because the whole reason why the miracle of the sun was seen on video and with cameras is because the communist leadership of Portugal at the time, and especially of the area at the time, wanted to disprove Catholicism, wanted to make fun of those little kids and shame Catholicism into non-existence because he hated the faith. And so he brought every single reporter from like all the place around to come and witness this, which he thought was going to permanently disprove Catholicism. It's beautiful because here in Mike Willesee's case, again, same deal, going to disprove this idiot Catholicism. And sure enough, it comes back with, oh my gosh, it's true.
It's true. And you mentioned Fatima. It's interesting because the first time, it's going to blow you away, the first time I ever heard about Fatima, my friend, was when I read Ron's book in 2009. See, in that book, this is what I learned. I learned about Fatima. I learned about Our Lady of Guadalupe. I learned about the Shroud of Turin. I learned about St. Padre Pio, St. Margaret Mary. I learned about Eucharistic miracles, the stigmata, redemptive suffering. I was overwhelmed. and one more thing about Mike Willesee. There was a guy named Muhammad Ali, and he was going to fight Joe Frazier for the third time. It was the Thrilla in Manila, right, in Philippines. They had 1,000 credited journalists that were dying to get time with Ali. And you can Google this. You can Google Mike Willesee, Muhammad Ali. And he got the entire week with Ali. And at the end of his life, Ron's interviewing him. And you'll read that in Ron's book. You can get that book from my website too, My Human Heart. And he's interviewing Mike as he's on his deathbed, literally dying of throat cancer, Mike Willesee. And Mike says, and I'm paraphrasing, Ron, thank you for turning me on to the biggest story of my life. He wasn't talking about Ali. He was talking about filming this lady have the stigmata. And this is why it needs to be a huge story. You mentioned Megyn Kelly, Bill O'Reilly. I'm like, Bill, Megyn, listen, there's no bigger story than this. There's not. They just don't know about it.
What is life for you like now? What did you go from? You were into sales. What are you doing now?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. So in 2009, I hosted Mike and Ron. I organized 2 talks, one in Ohio and one in Texas. Looking back, we didn't plan it. We weren't even going to film it. A guy named Bob Hughes from Love and Mercy filmed it in 2009. And it happened to be on the Blessed Mother's birthday. Now, nobody planned this. And if you watch that video, the original video, it's called Science Test Faith, Following the Trail of Christ. I got an old DVD. You see the Blessed Mother statue right behind the speaking podium as though she's blessing Mike. And you don't rarely see that. Like, even if she's up front, it's not behind. So I'm like, oh my gosh. Then I find out that the first mystical experience that Catalina Rivas, the stigmatist, ever had was on the Blessed Mother's birthday in 1991. Because as you know, Mary has one job, to bring people to her son. And if you read my book, From the Crack House to God's House, that's what my mom was doing, asking for intercession, praying the rosary for all of her kids, especially me, because I went way off the deep end, right? So what happened? I host them to come. It's overflow. Nobody knows who they are. Nobody knows who I am still, which is fine. And we go in Texas, it's the largest church in the diocese, and yet people were on the wall, right? So I said, I knew this was a story. And Ron and Mike went back to Australia, and I said, I basically took everything I've learned from all the debates in apologetics, everything I've read at that point in time, as I started to read and still do from Catalina's messages, and it never ends, and everything from the Bible and the church. And I said, I want to show people, not tell people, show people the biblical, the historical, and the supernatural proof for the Catholic Church. And so I put together a PowerPoint. That was my background, speaking. So I put together a PowerPoint locally. And I don't remember how it happened because I never meant to start something. When you say an apostolate or a ministry, that would be foreign language to me. I'm like, what do you mean? I didn't even know people did stuff like this full time. I'm like, how's that possible? So my wife wanted to homeschool, and we spent, and you see this in my book, I got pictures all over. We spent years traveling all over the United States. We do other things financially as well, insurance and mortgage, but traveling the United States in an old conversion van with our kids from church to church to church, right? And so it's really never stopped in that sense. I go a lot of times with one of them or maybe myself and that kind of thing, but literally been traveling all the United States, and we've barely scratched the surface. So outside of our secular work, this is my main focus, to share this with the world. And I'm frustrated, John, and I'm glad I'm on your show because, like you said before we started talking, nobody knows about this.
29 million watch it to start with. And then you can tell them to your blue in the face, but nobody catches this. It's like the biggest secret, and yet it's staring you in the face. I'm going to get clobbered by my wife if I don't ask you. You said your wife was like not into it. She's obviously Catholic now. How did that happen?
You know, she started to see, and she was open to, I remember at one point she said, can we just not have Mary things in here, in the house and stuff like that? And she used to pray the Rosary, and she'd say, Holy Mary, Mother of Jesus, instead of Mother of God, she would say. I think the turning point when we completely stopped, and it's not one thing I can think of, was when I got the book from Tesorero and I started reading the messages to my wife out loud. Oh, wow. She could visually see the lady have a stigmata. She could visually see, and by the way, all of your viewers can go to my website and see her writing and getting messages from Jesus and the stigmata. And she saw that. She saw that it was proved by the church, right? I mean, beyond that, in my opinion, her archbishop made her his executive secretary and had this huge Eucharistic Congress. And so when you read those messages, it became abundantly clear to her that there was a distinct difference. I know that sounds odd to you. Of course there is. But to somebody who's trying to play both sides of the megachurch environment and that, they're all kind of the same thing. She saw clearly the focus on the Eucharist and the Mass and the importance of the Blessed Mother. And the megachurches didn't have that. So that stopped. And then she wanted to homeschool. She got into a Catholic community. She got around that. I mean, so many influences, right? This story, it irritates me so greatly because I see you mentioned Megan Kelly and Candace Owens. I'm like, Candace, you're Catholic. There's no bigger story than this, like literally. And I didn't have a book to read back then. Here's the good news. You can watch the show, and then you've got From the Horse's Mouth, from Jesus Christ himself, a book called Jesus Speaks. Lights out. I don't care if you're a Catholic, a Protestant, an atheist. If you read that and see that, you have to come to terms with either this is, it's not made up, that's for sure. We know it's real because we got evidence galore. So either it's from God or from another spirit. And the good news is the fruits, and that's how you judge it, all lead people back to what the historic church has always believed, right? The Catholic Church. That's like a pizza, and you don't want to take off the pepperoni. You want to put everything together, the biblical, historical, and the supernatural. And I have to tell you, John, as you said, I don't know, most people don't know who I am. I don't even have a social media presence, okay? But I'll tell you this, I've got about 10,000 feedback forms. I know what happens. So when I come to a parish, and I'd love to come to anybody listening, if you'd like me to come to your parish, I'll tell you right up front, I don't charge a speaking fee, and I just want to get my travel reimbursed, okay? So your pastor will love that. But When we do a presentation, oh my gosh, because we put up big screens and we show the stigmata, we show that, but it's not just showing stuff. It's called signs from God, miracles and their meaning. And at the end of the day, what happens is people go, I'm going to daily mass. I'm going to confession. I haven't been for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. I'm going to do a holy hour now. And I'm certainly going to pray the rosary. You know what I mean? It becomes real.
Pope Pius XI said, men must look for the peace of Christ in the kingdom of Christ. And he urged that the faithful give public honor to Christ the King so that individuals and states would submit once more to the rule of their Savior. And that is why LifeSite News is raising up the image of Christ the King across the United States. And you can help us reach millions more. Please pledge your support today for these billboards at lifefunder.com/Christ is King. For me, one of the biggest understandings of going to Mass and wanting that, or it's almost like a recognition that how stupid would I have to be not to go to daily Mass? Because if I once read a book called One More Mass, and one of the souls comes back just to give this message that, you know, if he could come back, suffer a whole lifetime of suffering, it would be worth it for one more Mass. In the writings of Catalina Rivas, what for you touched you? One of the things that I've heard a lot of people say is, I never knew Jesus suffered when we don't come to him. I didn't know that Jesus is begging us to come to him in the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass. But what was it that struck you?
Let me just say that, as you know, it's now, after 15 years of this, it's a compilation of so many different elements that have gotten me deeper and deeper. Like if you look at a presentation I did back in 2012 compared to now, I mean, I'm so much deeper into the Mass now. It's incredible. I mean, I'm learning. It's never ending, right? I read this book called The Incredible Catholic Mass. It's written in the 1700s. I thought I'd already been traveling for several years. I thought I knew something. I read the book. I go, I don't know squat. This is amazing. So I'd say specifically about her messages, you hit the nail on the head. Jesus said, I'm a prisoner of love. And he talked about his suffering just like a father would suffer if their kids are wayward, right? You know, and the big thing for me, I'll do a parallel to working out. If you're going to work out and you want to like get in shape and you want to grow and stuff, you know, in my group, we just how much you could bench press and all this kind of stuff. You want to eat a certain way. You want to take some supplements, right? And if somebody said to me, hey man, we need to have a good week of working out this week, Tim, but I don't want you to eat. I thought you were nuts. Like, what do you mean not eat? I would knock your head off. I got to eat. That's how I grow. So the Mass, if people can think of it, that is your supernatural food. So if somebody says, I would never, I mean, of course people fast, but I'm saying on a normal basis, if people said, in order for me to be productive, I have to physically eat, then if they really understood what the Mass was and what the Eucharist was and how Jesus is feeding us, they would never, ever, ever not want to feed their soul, right? If they believe that. And I'm not saying if somebody doesn't go to daily Mass, they're a bad person or they don't have belief, but they don't have a full understanding and belief. I believe that because they would not stay away. Now, I say that things always get in your way. It's not a fun, you know, you're not going for fun. It's a discipline, right? Some people might say, I'm not motivated to go to daily Mass. And I said, it has nothing to do with motivation. It has to do with willpower. The motivation might come after, right? 6 months from now, you'll look back and you'll go, you know, as my dad said, and by the way, my dad, Edwin Joseph Francis, died on All Saints Day. I'm getting ready to go back to Ohio to clean out his house. And I talk about him in my book. He hadn't yet died yet. And my dad is a good old farmer kind of guy. And he would say, you know, Tim, looking back, he wasn't a theological guy, but he said, looking back, I think it helped, right? And I'd say it's impossible. And have you read any of her messages, John?
Yes.
Did you read the Holy Mass?
I don't think so.
Okay, that's kind of the most popular one, right? And I say popular, still nobody knows about it. But that's the first book in this book called Jesus Speaks. And I'll email it to you. You'll be happy. I mean, you got a million books to read. But somebody reads that, there's no way they do Mass the same tomorrow. There's no way. I mean, it's the sacramental life. That's my whole goal, to increase the sacramental and devotional life in the Catholic Church, right?
I'll often give this example, especially when I speak to young people. I tell them, how many of you here go to Mass every day? Nobody. What about if I told you that I would give you $1,000 every Mass you attended, but only if you went every single day of the year to Mass. Would you take me up on that challenge? It's 365 days. At the end of it, you're going to get $365,000 guaranteed. How many of you would do it? Every single hand goes up. Everyone. But I warn them. I tell them, like, hey, you might get sick one day. You still have to go. It doesn't matter. Tough luck, go. Every hand is going up. What is that? And then I tell them, oh, wait a minute. The Mass the Church teaches is of infinite value. So what are we doing? It doesn't make sense to me. I still don't get it. I go to daily Mass because for me, it's also that. It's like you'd have to be crazy not to. But, anyway, I don't know how to get there for everybody.
True deep belief, and I know that comes from different ways. There's not one size that fits all. There's different ways people have conversions. I get that. But here's totally what I know.
Yeah.
Here's what I know from 15 years of traveling. So I don't really have to guess. I used to think when I went to a church, John, I'm going to be speaking, and I'm looking for, this fringe, lukewarm, like I was, beyond lukewarm. But now I've come to believe, after doing these presentations, that the message is, I have people who go to daily Mass that after they come, they walk away changed in their understanding of how to participate fully in the Mass, how to pray the Mass. That's what I'm on about nowadays, is how to truly pray the Mass, right? And the importance of that. So I just think it's a matter of something catching people's attention. I'm very biased, of course. I think that if your kids and your grandkids that are away from the faith watch the video on my website of the lady have this stigmata, and if you go to my website and you click on the store, you'll see a book called Jesus Speaks. If you click on the Jesus Speaks and scroll to the bottom, there's 4 little videos, short ones, of her getting messages and the stigmata. I do believe those grab the attention of most people. Most people. Doesn't mean, I'm going to Mass tomorrow. But once you have someone's attention, now you have a conversation starter, right? What's this all about? Glad you asked. Now give him the book Jesus Speaks, or give him my book first, not because I'm trying to promote my book, because I'm going to lead into everything I'm talking about. My whole story from the crack, from growing up to the crack house to Guy's house, and people will want to know more. That's the key. People say, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. But there are tools and resources that God gave us that can lead them to the water, right? And then if they want to drink, wow, do we have a ton of resources, right, for them.
What I want to do is ask you for final thoughts and tell you we're going to have you back on again, because I think it's going to be fantastic to roll out more of this with you. But give us for right now final thoughts on really on your coming back, your encouragement for people to delve into the Holy Sacrifice, to take it daily if they can, and why they should do that.
That's easy. So look, here's the bottom line. All right. As I mentioned, if you wanted to have a productive week or month in your life, you'd make sure you ate the right food, right? And the supernatural food is Jesus Christ, his body, blood, soul, and divinity. And even if you can't receive, okay, don't stay away from Mass, because the main point of going to Mass is not to receive Jesus. It's a blessing we get to do that. Take advantage of it. But the main deal is to offer Jesus to the Father in the holy sacrifice of the Mass. And if you can learn how to pray the Mass, and email me, I'll show you how to pray the Mass, you can benefit the world. Okay, we're not just talking about heaven or hell, which is, of course, important. We're talking about benefiting people here. You can have peace in your life. You can keep evil away. If you thought that you were on a hunting trip and a bear was going to potentially come to your camp and they gave you bear spray, right? That's what the sacraments are. This is what keeps evil away from our lives, right? Truly. And so if people understood this, they'd be all over it. And I just say, finally, for those of you who have kids and grandkids away from the church, of course, we hear that all the time. I was that guy. I mean, you read my book, I was going nuts. I don't mean just horribly nuts. And my mother consistently, as you'll see in my book, wrote journals and prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed. And your prayers are so powerful. They truly are. I devoted the rest of my life to traveling and sharing this information with people, because the power of a mother's prayer. And so I think that's it. And I guess one last thing. watch the video on my website of the lady with the stigmata, and then make sure you definitely get Jesus Speaks. And I'm going to go ahead and promote my book, because I think that will show you my whole story as it leads up. It's called From the Crack House to God's House, The Power of a Mother's Prayer. God bless my mother, Patricia Ann Francis, Edwin Joseph Francis. Both have now passed away. And if you need somebody to pray for you, my mother was voted most likely to be a saint when she died, from our little church in Sacred Heart, New Carlisle, Ohio.
Tim Francis, absolutely beautiful. That's the first time I've heard the comparisons. The sacraments are like bear spray. God bless you. Thank you for being with us. And God bless all of you. And we'll see you next time.
The Lord be with you. I'm Deacon Keith Fournier, and I hope you enjoyed this video from LifeSite News. Check the links in the description for more content like this. You can also connect with LifeSite News on social media and stay up to date with the latest news on life, faith, family, and freedom. Thanks for watching, and may the Lord bless you.